As we all know, money talks. And could that be the ultimate driving factor to have Oregon and Washington State both join the Big 12? The answer is a definite maybe. Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's RC Maxfield here for the Back to 12 podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're giving you daily Texas Tech videos here on the channel, but talking all things Big 12 realignment, rumors, expansion, everything you need to know. We've got you covered right here. So join one of the most engaging Big 12 communities here on YouTube and hit that like button for the video and subscribe while you're at it. All right, before we even jump into this and I give you my main points and just the rumor side of it, I don't want to collude your judgment. I just want you to give me your instant gut reaction to hearing the potential of Oregon State and Washington State joining the Big 12. Just give me one letter. That's all I'm asking for. Will Oregon State and Washington State join the Big 12? Just a simple Y for yes or in for no. Let me know on the pinned comment down below. All right, let's start with where this is right now. As we all know, it's no longer the Pac-12. Instead, they lost a digit on there, and it's now the Pac-2. It is Oregon State. It is Washington State. And now there's a lot of rumors going around, and depending on who you listen to, there's some validity to it, and then there's some outright saying, no, this isn't going to happen, even though some that are saying yes are reading the tea leaves. Others are saying their sources are saying no. So it's really who do you trust in this, right? So I'm going to lay it all out in terms of what I've heard, and I'll give my general opinion later on in the video. But this is what we know right now. Again, rumors of Oregon State and Washington State potentially joining the Big 12. This is how it lays out. Any conference that falls under 8 members, it gets a 2-year grace period by the NCAA. What does that mean? That means they don't lose their automatic qualifier status during that time. Why is that such a big deal right now? Well, the college football playoff payout has a big deal with that, right? And you think about where are we going with the college football playoff? It's expanding. So if you go by the logic of, okay, you have 2 years theoretically to keep your automatic qualifier status if you're Washington State and Oregon State, who are the only 2 members of the Pac-2, because again, 1-2, right? They could technically, theoretically get $320 million that is paid out to automatic qualifiers through the college football playoff, right? And it would just be dispersed to them in theory. Now, this is where I think, in my opinion, from what I've read, it feels like Oregon State and Washington State potentially think they have leverage, right? But there's one thing to remember in all of this. And good old SEC Commissioner Sankey let us know about it. And that was 100% sarcasm on the good old part. I can't stand this guy. Anyway, the college football automatic qualifier technically isn't part of the NCAA. So it's its own body, right? Like it's its own entity per se. What's stopping the college football playoff to say, no, we're taking your automatic qualifier away, Oregon State and Washington State, because you don't meet the criteria of X, Y, and Z, right? Like what's stopping them from doing that? I think that there's something to be said for that when it's all said and done, right? An interesting wrinkle in all of this, though, that I think people need to be aware of is the Washington State president is on the college football playoff board. How does that work in terms of, does he try and leverage his position on this board to getting Washington State as well as Oregon State, I would assume, to another conference? There's also the subsidy aspect of this, where what's stopping the state of Oregon potentially with these 2 state schools, right? Because again, Oregon and Washington State, they're both state schools. It's in the name, right? What's stopping those 2 respective states not subsidizing in terms of their bigger brothers or whatever you want to call them in Oregon and Washington having to subsidize those schools, right? That's another rumor that's been thrown around there. I don't know if that's true, but it's something to think about in the sense of, okay, with Oregon and Washington going to the Big Ten, getting about $30 million a year, do they lose 10 of that to Oregon State and Washington State to help them stay afloat, right? Is that something that's actually theoretically possible? I'm not sure how that would work. I think there's so many avenues in this. I will say this, though. these are all rumors at the end of the day. And I think, again, my opinion on this, I don't think Oregon State and Washington State join the Big 12. I just simply don't, and for two main reasons. But before we get into my main reasons, one more time, let me ask you guys, will Oregon State and Washington State join the Big 12? Just a simple Y for yes or N for no. Let me know down in the comments below. All right, let's jump into reason number one. It's the votes in the voting block. What do I mean by that? You got to think of the landscape of the Big 12, okay? If they were to join, that would be 6 Pac-12 schools then, right? What's stopping them in theory as voting as a collective and kind of steering this conference in the way that they want it to go? What's stopping that, right? I think that there's a possibility that that happens. Now, I will say this. I don't think the Big 12 wants this for multiple reasons, and I'm talking about this situation specifically. Plus, I think the Big 12 is more focused on the East Coast right now. And I think that when you look at this, it's smart for them to be focused on the East Coast because we have no idea what's about to happen with the ACC, with all this Clemson talk, with all this Florida State talk, Miami talk, whoever's involved in it, right? Like, I think the priority, if you're, the Big 12 in this regard, is, hey, let's focus mainly on getting some more Eastern schools to pair up along schools like West Virginia, UCF, Cincinnati, schools like Louisville could be potentially that, or maybe Pittsburgh, Virginia, whoever it may be. Maybe you go down to the Carolinas and you try and snag a North Carolina and a Duke or whatever it may be, right, for the basketball side of things, right? There's a lot of ways they could go about this, but in my opinion, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of potentially having that situation where there is a key block of schools, 6 to be exact, on the West Coast or in the western part of the United States that could navigate potentially this conference for years to come. All right, let's go to reason number 2. It's Brett McMurphy and his quotes on 365 Sports. They do a phenomenal job, and so does Brett McMurphy over on the Action Network. He was asked if the Big 12 had any interest in adding Oregon State and Washington State. He gave 2 words, and it was a simple no and no, right? And when you hear somebody say this that is so widely regarded as one of the best college football insiders, he had his fingers on the pulse of every realignment aspect of it. He was one of the guys that really thought that the Big 12 could go out and actually add the 4 corners, right? So there's something to be said for that, right? It doesn't get much clearer when a guy like that says no and no when it comes to interest, right? Brett has also mentioned the only reason that the Big 12 would expand is if the ACC dissolved, just like we talked about a little earlier, and they would target schools like Pitt, Louisville, and other various schools in the conference. Look, I mentioned the Big 12's dream scenario earlier in the video. If Oregon State and Washington State were a part of that, why weren't they involved earlier in this process, right? I think when you look at it, the comments that Brett Yormark has had are very damning in the sense of if you're on the side that you don't think this is going to happen, I think you're on the right side right now in the sense of Brett Yormark has already made it abundantly clear that he said this was the dream scenario for us in terms of adding the 4 corner schools. They did that. If the dream scenario was, involving Oregon State and Washington State, it would have already happened, right? Maybe TV money talks here in the end, right? And that's the only reason I could see this actually happening, right? Is that you have ESPN or Fox is pushing for it. But I don't think those networks are going to do anything right now because they're waiting to see what the ruling is with the college football automatic qualifier bid for Oregon State and Washington State. Now, if there's $320 million involved, you best believe some conferences are going to come involved and try and get involved in that action, right? Again, do I think it's going to say $320 million? I don't know, but I can guarantee you that conferences will be involved in that. But right now, I don't think TV networks are really pushing for anything when it comes to that. And for that, my reason of thinking this is a possibility as it stands right now, again, we know with college football realignment, things can change at the drop of a dime, right? That quick. But as it stands right now, right, on October 6th, 2023. I just don't see this happening. But I want to hear from you guys again. Will Oregon State and Washington State join the Big 12? Just a simple Y for yes or N for no. Even during the season, college football realignment, it never, ever dies. And you know what else never, ever stops during college football season? It's us here at the Back to 12 podcast channel. We are giving you daily videos surrounding Texas Tech. Yes, that's our priority, but don't get it twisted. We talk a ton about the Big 12 on this channel. So if you want to join one of the most engaging Big 12 communities and one of the fastest growing Texas Tech podcast channels, hit that subscribe button and like the video to stay in the know right here on the Back to 12 podcast channel.